皆様、ご苦労様です。それでは始めたいと思います。まず最初に中央チベット政権ペンパツェリン首席大臣による基調講演が行われます。Kenyon
Central Tibetan Administration, Honorable Penpa Tsering. He is an incumbent minister of CTA, has been the chairman of the Parliament, born in and raised in South India, and learned at the college and participated in the Tibet activity, not only India, but also on a global basis. He has been active to communicating what's going on in Tibet. He is working close with American community and also international community.
Konnichiwa. Good morning to everyone. We just finished the opening session and you witnessed the video of Tibetan democracy in exile. In fact, I would like to mention that the Tibetan government in exile, or the Central Tibetan administration, is the only government in exile that has a fully functional democratic polity, thanks largely to the government of India for its generosity in allowing us to exist there. If it is not for the government of India, we don't exist. It's also thanks to His Holiness the Dalai Lama for his visionary leadership over the years, because of which we exist, and even an ordinary person like me can become a Sikyong and lead the Tibetan movement, have the opportunity to lead the Tibetan movement. To start with, I want to mention that His Holiness is doing very well in Dharamsala. He continues to meet with 300, 400 people every Monday, every Wednesday, and every Friday. Keeps engaging with the people all the time. Of course, because of his age, his schedules have been decreased dramatically, and he's not able to travel as much as he used to do before. So now the responsibility lies on us to travel and reach out to the world, and we have been doing that over the last 4 years as in my capacity as Sikyong. Coming here also, just before coming here, I was in the United States and Canada for a month-long visit, also because of the fact that the United States government has cut down on foreign assistance globally, and we became a collateral in the whole process, and we will be working relentlessly to get it back on track. Just a brief on expansion on what the speaker said already. The first World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet was started in 1994 in India, led by George Fernandez and Mohan Hsing. Then the second one was, and we have a strong delegation from India here with members of parliament, eminent experts, China analysts from think tanks, former diplomats. So I want to thank you all for, on behalf of the Tibetans, to the successive government of India for helping us in our endeavor to regain freedom for the Tibetan people. The second World Parliamentarians Convention was organized by Lithuania. Laima Andrikien and one another member of parliament was responsible for doing that. And we have two representatives from the Lithuanian parliament here today, and also a host of delegations from Baltic states, from Latvia, from Estonia, and also many countries from Europe. The third World Parliamentarians Convention was held in the United States, led by Benjamin Gilman in 1997. And after that, it took some time for us to organize the fourth World Parliamentarians Convention. So in my capacity as the director of Tibetan Parliamentary and Policy Research Center those days, was responsible under the leadership of the then speaker, Pema Jungne. We organized the fourth World Parliamentarians Convention in Scotland. And today we have Chris Law here, coming from Scotland, but he's in the Westminster Parliament. Then the fifth one was organized in Italy in 2009 in Rome. led by Matteo Mecacci and many of our friends in the Italian Parliament. And the sixth one was organized in Ottawa, led by Senator Dinino, who had attended almost every World Parliamentarians Convention. Unfortunately, because of his age and health, he could not be here, but we have Arif Virani, who's the former Justice Minister of Canada, representing Canada, because Canada Parliament is in session these days. And the seventh was organized in Latvia. So we have a Latvia Member of Parliament also here at this conference. And the eighth was, as Speaker mentioned, was organized in Washington, D.C. in 2022, led by Speaker Pelosi, Jim McGovern, Michael McCall, a lot of our friends on both sides of the aisle, in a bipartisan way. In fact, Tibet is the only one among the few issues where Republicans and Democrats can come together in the United States Congress. And we also have a representation from NED, who is part sponsoring this program in Pema Tulusang here. And I want to thank Ned Wilson for his leadership in NED. And now we have this parliamentary convention here, the ninth one in Japan. And I'm very thankful to the leadership of the parliamentary group here, the past leadership and the present leadership, for organizing this conference here in Japan, in this very elegant hall, the International Conference Hall of the Parliament building. And we also have Ms. Sakurai, who is a very old friend of Tibet, there's a leading think tank in Japan. We also have Sensei Makino, if he's around here. He is one of the few Japanese parliamentarians who attended almost every World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet. So I want to thank all of you for hosting this, along with the leadership of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, led by Speaker Khenpo Sonam Temple and Deputy Speaker Thomas Ringla. And we have a strong delegation from the Tibetan Parliament, 10 members in all, represented here at this conference, and also representatives of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Central Tibetan Administration from across the world, from Japan to United States, represented here. So thank you very much for your attendance. It means a lot to us. The representatives who are here, the delegates who are here, is very representative, I would say, because I travel around the world and we meet so many parliamentarians. Our parliamentarians also travel around the world and meet with so many parliamentarians, but because of schedule issues, because of some parliaments being in session, and some, of course, being pressured by the Chinese government, are not able to attend at this conference. And we have a very strong delegation also from Latin America, from Chile, from Costa Rica, and Mexico this time, 3 countries. Last time we had more in Washington, D.C. And from Chile, we also have a future presidential candidate here attending the conference. Thank you all very much. Despite all the pressure from the Chinese government, you made the effort to come and attend this conference, for gracing this conference. Thank you very much. And now we are living in very interesting times, as diplomats would like to say. The evolving geopolitics and also geoeconomics now, with the tariff war that's going on, that's reshaping the global international order, and poses a lot of challenges to the established international law. And there are also a lot of changes happening in China as well. The political changes, the economic difficulties that China is going through. We are trying to watch every situation, every moment in our exchanges, and also watching the developments in China is very crucial, because we are also going through a very crucial period of our struggle, because His Holiness has reached 90 years of age, and this July 6th we will be celebrating His Holiness' 90th birthday, and we plan to celebrate the whole year as the year of compassion, as we face so many challenges. As we speak, as we are gathered here, as I'm speaking now, there are so many violent conflicts around the world, And the message of nonviolence and compassion, which is very much rooted in the ancient Indian wisdom and manifested through the messages of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is very, very crucial at this point of time in the world, where it could contribute to more peace in the world. The Year of Compassion in Dharamsala, this year we are focusing, because we have, there are a lot of questions about His Holiness Reincarnation, and only one document that is available on His Holiness Reincarnation is the September 2011 document, in which he says that when he reaches the age of 90, then he would make a statement. And most probably by the beginning of July, His Holiness will make a statement on his reincarnation and the processes involved therein. When we talk about His Holiness' contributions to the world, particularly celebrating the Year of Compassion, I would like to... Okay, so there's very limited time, so I'll skip that part, but I would request the parliamentarians for some of the asks that we have been doing during the celebration of His Holiness. One is to adopt resolutions, motions or statements in the House or outside the House. We will also be distributing a lot of exhibition materials which would be useful in conducting exhibitions on the legacy of His Holiness. You can organize this in the Parliament buildings or outside the Parliament buildings. You can also take part in speaking on His Holiness' 4 commitments. And then we have also been requesting various governments during this trip. This time, we have requested for a US congressional delegation to Dharamsala during this period of 1 year, and also a Canadian parliamentary delegation. Just yesterday, or a few days back, I requested the Japanese parliamentary delegation to come to Dharamsala. Similarly, all the members who are represented here, if you could organize cordial visits to Dharamsala, that would be highly appreciated. And now there's not much time. Otherwise, I've been speaking about the strategy that we have adopted. We are firmly committed on the middle way policy, but when His Holiness talks about middle way, then he refers to the polarities or the extremes. One extreme or one polarity or one end of the spectrum is the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. And the other polarity is the present situation of occupied Tibet under the repressive communist government. So if there is no recognition for these polarities, then there is no value for middle way. That is why we have worked for more than 2 years with the US Congress to get this Resolve Tibet Act passed in the Congress, which was signed into law by President Biden last year, and some of the content were already mentioned here. China claims that there is no Tibet problem, and just one more minute, okay? Tibet problem, and the law says that Tibet is yet to be an unresolved conflict or dispute, and that it needs to be resolved under international law. And this law also talks about Tibetan people's right to self-determination, which is very much in line with 1961 UN resolution on Tibet. And most importantly, countering China's false narrative on Tibetan history the law says that China's false narrative on Tibet is not accepted by His Holiness Dalai Lama, and the United States government also does not accept China's narrative that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times. So this is something that we want every other parliament or government to, or like-minded countries to follow suit, to put pressure on the Chinese government so that they come and talk to us. So it's a very crucial period of our struggle. His Holiness is reaching the age of 90. We need your support more than ever before. We will not be yielding to the Chinese at all. We will follow nonviolence as a path, and we hope that your support will continue through the years till we return back to Tibet in freedom and to live in freedom and in dignity. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
続きまして、国際チベットキャンペーン、リチャード・ギア議長による講演、ビデオメッセージになりますけれども、
by the Chairperson of International
リチャード・
Campaign
ギ
for
ア氏は
Tibet,
世界的
Richard
に著名
Gere.
な俳優であると同時
Mr.
に
Richard Gere is
人
a
権活動家としても広く知られています。とりわ
world-renowned
け
actor
長
as
年にわ
well
た
as
り
a
チベ
human
ッ
rights
トとダライラマ
activist,
法への
and
深い
particularly
支援を
for
続けて
Tibet
こられました。
and for His
1990
Holiness
年
Dalai
代から
Lama.
国
He
際
has
社
been
会でチ
providing
ベ
a
ッ
lot
ト
of
問題を
support
訴え、
since back
現在はアメリカに本部を
1990s.
置くインターナショナルキ
He
ャン
has
ペーン
been
for チベット
active
の会長を務め、
in
非暴力と人
human
権を
rights
訴える声
activities,
を広げ
and
ています。
currently he
それで
is
はよろしくお願
chairing
いい
the
たします。
ICTI, International Campaign for Tibet, out of US. Please enjoy the video.
Greetings, hello everyone, and Tashi Dale to everyone gathered today at the World Parliamentarian Conference on Tibet, the 9th of these truly important conferences. I'm sorry I can't be there with you right now. I wish I was, but I want to thank all of you and all of our friends in the Japanese Parliament, the Kokai, for hosting this very special conference. Let me stress the importance of democracy in our world today, which clearly has become a battleground between brute power and the benevolent rule of law. But we must stand together now, be strong and resilient, and unite around the causes that make us stronger, causes that reflect our common values of peace, justice, and human rights. Tibet is that cause. Every time I come to Dharamsala and when I meet with members of the Tibetan Parliament in exile, everybody's always very grateful to me. Of course, it makes me happy, but no, it's not the Tibetans that have to be grateful. It's me. It is us, freedom-loving people, who need to thank the Tibetans for inspiring us, for offering us an opportunity to support them, for their commitment to democracy and truth. They actually give us hope. And now it's our turn to pay back. Democracies in Asia are natural allies of the Tibetans. They understand very well, probably better than many in Europe and America, how difficult it is to engage with an authoritarian China, with the Chinese Communist Party. This year is very special for Tibetans. A first round of elections for the parliament and the government in exile will commence this year. Something extraordinary, really, as Tibetans from all around the world will cast their ballots. A challenge to organize this event indeed, and I admire the energy of all involved who make this possible. Thank you. I encourage everyone to follow closely these elections, and we must keep in our minds and in our hearts the Tibetans who are still suffering inside Tibet, who are denied this right. Most important still, this year we're going to be celebrating His Holiness the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday, a very special event. And this is a moment to celebrate, but also, I think, to reflect on His Holiness's life commitments, his achievements of peace and compassion and for genuine dialogue. Let us not forget His Holiness's deep commitment to democracy. Not only did he establish the democratic system in exile, he also gave up his political authority in 2011 in order to further democratize the Tibetan people and the Tibetan government in exile. This is unique, rarely seen in world history, something very special. I'm happy to see that all of you have gathered together here today in this spirit of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and joining your support for Tibet and the Tibetan people in this crucial moment in Tibetan history, but also this challenging moment on this small, beautiful planet that we all call home. Thank you.
リチャード・ギア氏ありがとうございました。続きまして、ナムキ氏による体験談をお話をいただきます。ナムキ氏は中国当局による弾圧のもと、 16歳で平和的抗議を行ったことで逮捕され、年齢を改変され、3年の懲役刑を課されました。拷問や強制労働を得た後、
experiencing
釈放後に
the
は
interrogation and forced labor, and she was monitored for her activity, and now in India, and she is liberated. So she has been active to share her experience to take actions. Ms. Namkyi, floor is yours.
원도긴 감슴거 다 잔나거 중아오고 존카노나 이즈거 따르타 똥쩍 뭐 보여리 드니 저르던거 잔나 종거 이즈거 다 가수 원난거 이즈거 다 디르케당 다 강당 뭐포즈 잔나가 녹실치는데 잔나랑거 이즈거 다 망아서 잔나 종거 이즈거 치른 조건들 가수 원난 이즈거 직장
Do we have translation in English? Yeah. English translation. Can somebody want to work on that, please?
Janag jongin tsuk ta nga tsu wonnang gi tsuk kara ta tirka monposin tsuk janag jong no shirin jogndri ti yombe tsuk nga tsu
英語の翻訳されてないですね。マイク入ってないですね。少しお待ちください。
tarta wonnang gi tsuk ta chapru tsonz janag jong nga gon tsuk tsomma tsuk tongchong mo potar tang tsuk janag jong zonkana
Currently, many Tibetan political prisoners like myself are suffering similar hardships across the 3 provinces of Tibet under Chinese imprisonment. Tibetan religion, culture, language, and customs are being systematically destroyed under Chinese oppression. Extensive mining operation of Tibet natural resources with the incumbent profits entirely seized by Chinese government, leaving Tibetans without any benefit. The school at Karki Monastery in Tibet, which is connected to me and once served over 800 students, have been forcibly closed. Even traditional religious practice such as prayer offering for the sick and deceased, Chapten and Noten to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Kapuje Kitri Rinpoche are prohibited. The fact that an essential part of our religious devotion, like displaying portraits of the two Rinpoches, are subject to interrogation and imprisonment, clearly illustrating the situation in Tibet. Looking at my own story, I was born in a simple nomadic family in Penpa, in the Kareo area of Ngawa religion in Amdo province of Tibet. Like many other nomadic children, I lived with my parents doing nomadic work from a young age, so I did not have a good fortune to attend school. However, from a young age, I heard many sad stories about Tibetan history from elders, primarily my parents, about how the People's Republic of China, PRC, invaded Tibet through killings and plundering, and how many holy figures, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the supreme protector of Tibetan in this life and the next, and the Kabuli Kitri Rinpoche, had to go into exile in India. Hearing these stories made me immensely sad. I repeatedly prayed that someday Tibet would gain freedom and that I could see my root guru's face and hear his teachings. In Tibet, many patriots, irrespective of gender and age, were concerned and deeply distressed, feeling that the United Nations and countries of the world would not know the daily suffering and oppression in Tibet, where the PRC was directly and indirectly preventing monasteries, schools, and the public from preserving, managing, and promoting Tibetan religion, culture, and language with severe restrictions on freedom of movement. In late September 2015, while herding livestock, my cousin Tenzin Dalma and I had several secret discussions. On 21st October 2015, at 3 p.m. local time, we went to Power Street, Hero Street, in Ngawa, wearing complete traditional Tibetan clothing, including rosaries and Tibetan boots. Holding large portraits of His Holiness and Dalai Lama, we marched through the crowded streets, shouting slogans, "Tibet needs freedom," "Allow His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and the Kabir Kitri Rinpoche to return to Tibet soon," and "May they live for thousands of years." After less than 10 minutes of protests, we heard a loud noise from behind, and 4 or 5 police officers forcibly took the portraits from our hands. There was pushing and pulling for about 30 minutes. They told us to be quiet, not shout, while holding us down from front and back, but we continued to shout as much as we could. Then they handcuffed our hands behind our back, put us in vehicle, and forcibly took us to the detention center in Ngawa region. Around midtime that day, we were transferred to Ngawa region to detention center in Balkham. For more than 6 days in a small interrogation room with excessively heated, rotating interrogators asked us various questions like who instigated our protest, who first suggested it, where we got His Holiness Dalai Lama's portraits, whether we knew anyone outside, and so on. They called us traitors to the country, asking if we knew our crimes were very serious, while pulling our hair, suppling our face, and kicking us. The continuous beatings, food deprivation, and sleep deprivation made me repeatedly wish to die quickly. Sometimes they would pretend to be kind, saying if we told them truth, our punishment would be reduced and we might even be released soon. However, we clearly stated that we carried out this peaceful protest on our own decision without anyone's instigation, and that our families knew nothing about it. Thereafter, we were put into Tashigyaoka regions detention center for around 7 months. After around a year and a month later, on 23rd November 2016, my cousin and I were taken to the court of Torachu region for trial. This was the day when my cousin and I saw each other for the first time after our detention. None of our parents and family members were to be seen. There were 2 women lawyers, Tibetan and Chinese, appointed by the Chinese government. We were accused of doing separatist activity by uprising against a nation, China, and of having devotion to separatist Dalai Lama, and were imprisoned for 3 years. We were taken to Sichuan's ethnic minority prison and then to Chengdu City, largest women's prison. Even though 2 Tibetan women were imprisoned in the same prison in the past, during that time, 2 of us were only Tibetan among over 6,000 prisoners. For the first 3 months, we were given military training, taught constitution and other rules and regulations of the PRC, as well as many Chinese documents in the name of instilling patriotism, and then interviewed to check we have learned how to survive in prison. After 3 months, I made copper wire in labor camp daily, and my cousin first made a cigarette case and then worked making watches. Although my family sent good food and clothing to the prison, these never reached me. I endured many hardships, including nutritionally poor food, thin bedding, and clothing that left me cold during winter, discrimination and contempt because of my different ethnicity, and initially significant language barrier difficulties. In 21st October 2018, we were released from the prison after serving our terms. We were kept at Penpa police custody in Nugawa region for a week and made to write letters of understanding to our family. Because my brother was also in prison, our family was placed on the blacklist. Even after our release, we were kept under surveillance with no freedom of movement whatsoever, and even meeting someone required caution, causing continued difficulties. Therefore, on 13 May 2023, without informing any family members, I escaped into exile in India with Aunt Tsering. On 27 May 2023, we managed to reach the reception center in Nepal. On 28 June 2023, we arrived at the central reception center in Dharamsala. On 3rd July 2023, I received the opportunity of having audience with His Holiness and Dalai Lama, the Omniscient One, who is protester and the leader of all Tibetans, a happiness that cannot be defined. I would like to appeal peace-loving and pro-justice countries and organizations to learn and research on the situation of the 3 provinces of Tibet, and provided us your support by pressuring China both directly and indirectly. English translation completed, finished reading English transcript.
Nirton nigur zaksam go dawar ngawi nanga ta nga jagal rongolong patuin nga barkirzayo jibdi tan tandala gawi jerkep tan tsukdika wo chokaksam choyochig nirtan la jilun tan jimjib shite japtur tan rogram shite janag jola ngoshik jissamni janag jola noshik torji barkir joyin ngazu tarta wonna shiga haliga zatag nangam zatagin ngazu yishu komshi tang ngazu chuze jotam janak ngotam miper zojo janak ngazu nang chuze jo tigzi taw kunuda miper zojo ngazu taro totam mo points ga janak zonkona yo so ina nagni chikchang yo mari yenna ngasu wurrang insaka chutan rigjon kay yesho komshita kosu dangza yenna da netpa zodi janak jong miper zunda yinchi mani zonkana da nyokundo minna lochi ni samsam londang gamadu jagal no loni insaka hobjo ragna dara saddam bayon ngasu wanna yor girgem chiyena ngaso ti top tak kamun jimchan kari rezina kosus ta samlo ta rugni pimo po yego jayora timer net payodi girgir tani kanji kamundu tani lok samjir ngazma gor kanji kamundu ramjang khir yogundu tarta nilemen siko golong gabdi gen siko hakir dorjin na kor kashik songa ngaso timi mopo shong yore ngaso wonnang nit pata timi zodi janaka miper zu tak tak zun jokundu
Tibetan nakade Tibet no bunkaya gengo shukyo no kazudo shitaru sono kazudo suru kata tachi no ni tajide
Thank you very much indeed. Since the time is now limited, later on, as for Namkyi-san's statement, would be translated, and I hope there will be an opportunity for that to be translated. And since now the time is limited, we would like to hold a Q&A session, but we would like to skip this. Thank you very much indeed, two speakers. Thank you very much indeed.
We are very sorry. The translation of the Japanese and the English couldn't go well, although we have all the transcripts given to the translator. So what we will do is later on we will have the English translation and the Japanese translation sent to all the delegates and attendants here. We are very sorry for that. Thank you, Urano Sensei, for taking over the session. Thank you, Sikyong, for the same, and Namkyi also for this. So with this, we end the third session, and we end the second session, and we will start the third session, please. And the third session will be about the Tibet narratives countering China's disinformation and propaganda. And this session will be chaired by Dr. Mumin Chen, professor at the Graduate Institute of International Politics, National Chung University, Taiwan, and Vice President, Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. Dr. Mumin Chen, please. And I request Mr. Dilip Sinha and Ms. Ishiyama Yumiko Sensei also to take over the stage.
Can we start? Can we start? Yeah, we can start. Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay. Konnichiwa. Jasidele. My name is Mumin Chen. I'm from Taiwan. I'm right now Vice President for Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. This foundation is sponsored by Taiwan Parliament and the Foreign Ministry, dedicating to promoting human rights and democracy. And I'm also teaching in Taiwan in university. I'm pleasure to be here today to attend the conference and to chair this session on Tibet narratives. The topic is about China's disinformation and propaganda. And we know my country, Taiwan, also suffer a lot in recent years from China's disinformation. And because of the relation between Taiwan and China, that China keep saying that Taiwan is a part of China, and they never give up the the plan for invading Taiwan or conquering Taiwan with military force. But Taiwan has been independent political entity for decades. We are also a democracy, and we fight for our democracy. We fight for our freedom. So in recent years, China started a new campaign that is to try to change the way they talk about the relationship between Taiwan and China. A lot of disinformation, a lot of wrong ideas has been spread in Taiwan and also around the world about the reality between Taiwan and China. And why I say this is because that Tibet also face the same situation. And as a researcher on China and also on Tibet, we also found that the Chinese government trying to find new ways to influence the world community on the status of Tibet and also the history of Tibet. They have been doing this for a long time, yeah. But there are something new right now. Chinese government, they no longer call Tibet Tibet. They use a Chinese name Xizang to call this place. Yeah, and this act, try to find some new ways to legitimize their control over Tibet, which is wrong. That is why we are here today to tell the world, and also to find solutions and to find a strategy to combat this situation. And today we have two speakers. And allow me to invite the first speaker, Mr. Dilip Sinha. And Mr. Sinha is a former Indian diplomat, and right now he's an independent researcher, and also he's an author of a book. It's a book, right? It's a book, Imperial Games in Tibet. So please, Mr. Sinha.
Thank you, Dr. Chen and Ms. Ishihama. distinguished Tibetan guests and friends of Tibet. It is an honor for me to be present here to speak on this very interesting topic. Tibet is India's largest neighbor. Tibet is India's largest neighbor. Historically, it has also been the most peaceful neighbor. For 2 millennia, we shared a common frontier, the Himalayas. Our gods and our holy spirits lived in these mountains, and both countries worshipped the mountains, worshipped the rivers, and lived in peace. It is very difficult to find in history two neighbors living so peacefully together, and such few occasions, literally 2 or 3, where armies have crossed. Otherwise, it was always monks, pilgrims, traders, scholars crossing from one side to the other as a link between our two countries. But things changed. Things changed in 1950-51, in the 1950s, when for the first time in history we had Chinese forces stationed on our northern border. So the most peaceful border where we would not even station a security guard was suddenly became one of the most militarized borders in the world and a security nightmare for India. Now, when countries try to recreate their lost empires or reconstruct and popularize some mythical lost glory, then they have to indulge in a lot of mythology. They have to create myths. And for that, they have to indulge in disinformation. And that is what is happening today by China in Tibet. Now, one of the myths that has been perpetrated is that China liberated Tibet peacefully, but liberated from whom? First, they said we liberated from foreigners. But when Chinese troops came into Tibet, the only foreigner they could find was one gentleman, a British wireless operator, Robert Ford, in Chamdo, who was taken prisoner, and 5 years later he was released. Otherwise, there were no other foreigners. There were certainly no foreign armies there. Then the Chinese said, oh, we liberated the people of Tibet from their theocratic feudal government structure. But then that myth was also broken when they found that when they tried to imprison the Dalai Lama in 1959, the people of Lhasa rose to protect their leader. And when their leader managed to flee to India, along with him, 80,000 refugees came to India. So that broke the myth that the people of Tibet were not with their leader, His Holiness. Now, one of the mysteries that I tried to resolve, and in my book I have tried to do that, is why is it that even though the people of Tibet resented and revolted against Chinese rule and invasion, no country in the world regards Tibet as a country under foreign occupation. No country in the world recognizes the Tibetan government in exile as a government in exile. And there is no dearth of small causes in the world which are recognized by countries which are as disputed territories or as colonies of foreign countries. But in the case of Tibet, it is not so. Now, this again is the product of the disinformation that we have from China. And I tried to understand why this happened. So first, I'll very briefly discuss what China's claim to Tibet, and then come down to the last point, which is why is it that no country in the world recognizes Tibet as a country under foreign occupation or as an international dispute? Now, China's claim to Tibet. The Chinese historians themselves differ on when Tibet became a part of China. Most historians believe that Tibet became a part of China in the 18th century when the Manchu Qing dynasty invaded and sent troops into Tibet. It wasn't technically an invasion, it was more like an interference in the internal affairs because of various political struggles. But that is the period that most people treat as the time when Tibet became a part of China. But then many historians trace it further back to the time when the Mongols invaded in the 13th century. And they say that, well, when the Yuan dynasty was set up in China, then Tibet became a part of China. But the Yuans were Mongols, and they had a huge empire, as you all know, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Hungary. One of the the largest contiguous land empire in the world ever in history. So it wasn't a Chinese empire, but the Chinese claimed that Mr. Genghis Khan was a Chinese, and therefore Tibet became a part of China. Then some historians trace it further back to the Tang period, when in a matter of about 2 centuries or so, you had two Tibetan princesses were married to kings in Tibet. So the Chinese claimed, look, since our princesses got married to the Tibetan kings, therefore our Tibet became a part of India, part of China. Now, nowadays, the Chinese government says that Tibet has been a part of China since ancient times. And they are digging up archaeological evidence to prove that. And if you saw a report yesterday, I think it came out, that they had done some DNA studies of the people of Tibet and found that they actually came from Yunnan. So some 70% are supposed to have come from northern China and 30% from Yunnan. So all this is history making that is being done through revision of history. Now I come to the last part of my presentation, which is my understanding of why no country in the world recognizes Tibet as a country under foreign occupation. And why is it that when Tibet was invaded, no country came to its help? When Tibet was invaded, the Dalai Lama fled from Lhasa to the southern part into a place called Yatung in Chumbi Valley on the border of India, Sikkim. And from there he appealed to the United States, United Kingdom, India, and the United Nations for help. None of the 3 countries, including my own, helped him. Eventually, it was El Salvador that raised the matter in the General Assembly. But in that debate, the British delegate said, let's postpone it. The Indian delegate said, well, there are peace talks taking place between Tibet and China, therefore let's wait. And discussion was shelved. It was postponed. It was not voted upon. It was shelved, never to be brought up again. Now, why did this happen? Why did Britain played a very active role in trying to ensure that there was no interference? And that took me back to the 19th century, when you had what is called the Great Game between Britain and Russia. Both these empires were moving towards Central Asia. Russia was coming down from Europe and conquering Central Asia. Britain had just conquered all of India, and by the middle of the 19th century, its troops had reached the Himalayas, and they were trying to establish control in Central Asia. Russia had an advantage because Russia had an overland route, and the British had their hands full in India. In the middle of the 19th century, in 1857, there was a big revolt in India against British rule, and the British barely managed to survive. So when the British first reached Beijing in 1860, they had the Chinese empire at their feet, but they did not overthrow the Qing dynasty. In India, they had overthrown the Mughal dynasty, sent the Mughal emperor to Yangon to die, but in China, they felt that if the Chinese empire broke up, then Russia would be the biggest gainer of that collapse. So they felt it was best to keep the Chinese empire intact. And that became the European policy towards China. The China calls this period its period of century of humiliation, which it was to a great extent. But the fact remains that China was never ruled by a European power. The Qing dynasty continued. Britain helped China reconquer the empires, the territories it had lost. And then in 1907 came the agreement between Russia and Britain on how to divide Central Asia between them. This agreement came about because Russia by this time had lost to Japan in the 1904 war. So Russia's ambitions had come down. Britain also was willing to compromise. And as part of this compromise, the fate of 3 countries were decided: Tibet, Afghanistan, and Iran. It was decided that Tibet would remain a part of the Chinese empire, and Britain would only be allowed to keep 3 trading centers in Tibet and no mission in Lhasa. So while Britain dealt with Tibet as practically an independent country and dealt directly with Tibet in the first half of the 20th century, it always recognized Tibet as being under the suzerainty of China. That was the provision that was made in that 1907 Anglo-Russian Convention. And then later in 1914, there was a big conference in Shimla in which Tibet participated as did China participate. And Britain, and that agreement says that Tibet is under the suzerainty of China. Even though the Tibetan delegation participated in the conference as a high contracting party. Now, a high contracting party was a term used for a sovereign country, but it was a very peculiar diplomatic concoction. Therefore, this was the policy that was continued by Britain and Russia, and the rest of the world followed, including my own country. So there we are about the disinformation on Tibet's status, and we hope that this will be corrected by countries, including my own. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. Chinese people always say they are the victims of imperialism. And of course, that in the 19th century, China lost a lot of territories to Russia and also to other countries. But today, in the 21st century, when China look at the boundary with the neighbors, when China look at their own territories, they are actually using the rules created by the Western countries to defend their own interest. And when we talk about the status of the Tibet in history, Tibetan people and the Chinese people and the Western people have different interpretations. So when we talk about narratives, the Chinese say that Tibet has been part of China. That is their own narrative. And we should not allow the Chinese narrative to be the only narrative about the status of Tibet. Yeah, because as a person from Taiwan, we also feel the same thing, like Tibetans. The Chinese say, oh, Taiwan has been part of China for centuries. Just like Chinese say that Tibet has been part of China for centuries. Actually, before the 20th century, it was not like that. Yeah, so that is why I think it's meaningful for us to be here today to address this issue and also to find, how to solve the problem. Okay, please. Now the second speaker, Ms. Yumiko Ishihama, sorry, yeah. And she is a professor of Waseda University in Japan. And she also gave a topic that is the CCP's claim and the propaganda on the selection of the Dalai Lama. Yeah. Please.
Thank you for your introduction.
First of all, I have to say sorry. I have received an email. I thought I was going to make a presentation towards the Japanese Diet members, so everything has been made in Japanese language. I am sorry for this. I should have made these slides in English. As for myself, I have been researching Tibet and Mongolia's history, and I have published many books, and some of the books have been published in English. So when you Google my name, then you would be able to Tibetan modern history books. So I hope you will Google that. As for today, from the representative, I was asked to talk about the reincarnation system of Tibet. So that's why I am here today. And in fact, first of all, the traditional Tibetan reincarnation is what I would like to talk first. Of course, why this topic? Well, His Holiness Dalai Lama would become 90 years old this year. And excuse me for saying this, but next Dalai Lama, how would this person be chosen? And everybody, the mass media included, and everybody is so interested, and they would come to me with that question. And of course, the answer is clear. And as for that answer, the Tibetan traditional way of thinking should be introduced here. First, there are senior monks. So if the senior priest die, then first, that would be inherited from father to son. It's called the Nimma faction. And second is those who cannot marry. In other words, the priest would remain single throughout his life. So that would be inherited from uncle to nephew. And this kind of action is conducted by various factions. And the fourth one is called the teacher-disciple inheritance. So if there is a good disciple, then that would be inherited to this person. And at the moment in Tibet, the Gelk faction is the largest faction in Tibet. And as for the third one and fourth one would be conducted together, the reincarnation inheritance. And as for Dalai Lama, there would be the inheritance as a reincarnation. So you have to find this person to inherit the Dalai Lama. And from 1 to, except number 1, 2 to 4 should remain single. Next slide, please. So in order to find this reincarnated person, it's a very difficult procedure and issue. So in what way, in traditional way, has the Tibetans been doing with this? So first of all, this high priest, before he dies, there would be a will written by this Lama, and then the reincarnated child candidate. Of course, there are several candidates. So up until 4 years old, would that person have the previous life memory? And third, the former Dalai Lama had been using something, then would this child be able to identify such goods or face as well? And fourth, the aid of the predecessor would look at the candidate and to acknowledge that. And sixth would be to have the shaman oracle should be asked. So the God, so those people who know about the world, the Buddhist God, would be asked. But the important thing here is to do this in front of everyone. In other words, in order to conduct this, then everybody's opinion would become one, and this child would be chosen, because there would be a general point of view, and this child would be the successor of the previous Dalai Lama. And if this is functioning well, then the Tibetan Buddhism, the successor, so for example, in order to teach Buddhism from the early age, and the bright child would be chosen. So if this child is not bright, then by doing this kind of selection had been successful. But China came, and then most of the monks had exiled to India, but this Panchen Lama, the high priest, remained in China. And in 1995, the Chinese government had, as for the Panchen Lama selected by Dalai Lama, this was rejected by the Chinese government and dethroned. And here, this golden urn, this vase, there is a kind of a lottery inside, and the name of the children's names would be there, and that would be chosen like a lottery. So in 1995, like here, this boy would become the next successor. So the Chinese Communist Party, this golden seal was given to this person. So it's like doing this choosing a Chinese emperor like in Manchuria. So this Panchen Lama was selected and throned. So this golden vase, when did it begin? Well, the Manchurian emperor called Chen Emperor. Next slide, please. Sorry, this is in Japanese. In 18th century, this high priest, in order to choose the high priest, that could become limited to a certain family. So that would made into a confrontation. So this Shaolong emperor would say, don't concentrate on a particular family, but rather do a lottery. So this golden urn system had been introduced by him. But as a preposition, this emperor within the Tibetan Buddhism is like a grand sponsor. So this person should believe in Tibetan Buddhism. And like this person would be saying as a devout believer of Bodhisattva. Then as for this golden vase, from the Tibetan side, rather than using this vase, but rather conduct with a traditional way of selection. So the 13th Dalai Lama, 14th Dalai Lama, regardless of this vase, were chosen. And here, this is a Shaolong emperor, and this person regarded himself as a bodhisattva. So he envisioned himself like in this picture, and these kind of pictures have been published a lot. And like this person believed in reincarnation. So of course the Tibetan people, golden vase was not accepted by the Tibetan people, but well, maybe not to lose this faith of this Shaolong emperor. And as for this, about the Panchen Lama, selection of Panchen Lama, this was the high priest who was attending this selection. And Ajahn Rinpoche, during the selection, was a witness. And as for the Chinese officials towards this lottery, there has been a crafted manipulation of this vase. So they wanted to select this certain boy for this Panchen Lama. And of course, the Dalai Lama, the accredited boy, was not there within the candidate. So this person has exiled and has made an accusation. And 1987 was the year going to the United States. And I was under this CCP rule. And what kind of a selection procedure did I receive? What kind of torture did I receive? Was this testimony being included in this book? So you can Google this as well. In other words, the Tibetan traditional way of doing things. And here, in 2007, the Chinese government has adopted this kind of law. In other words, all the reincarnated person would be selected by this golden vase urn. And this kind of law has been enacted. In other words, the next Dalai Lama would be chosen by us. So that is a procedure the Chinese government has taken. In other words, in order to interfere with the selection of the Dalai Lama. And this is you can also search this. And towards that, in 2012, the 14th Dalai Lama has withdrawn from the political system and has come up with a guideline of the selection. You can also Google this as well. And what's being said here is just one. Traditional way of selection should be used for my successor. Next slide, please. Sorry, this is about here. In other words, Dalai Lama's staff using traditional way of selection should be used. And as for CCP, it does not believe in reincarnation, and they are they do not believe in any religion. So by using that law, that means that would become kind of a lie towards them. So in other words, the successor would be conducted by the staff. The traditional way of selection, there should be a will of this high priest. So the 14th Dalai Lama has been saying this clearly. In other words, the Chinese government's law being used to choose the next successor would not be admitted. So the Tibetan people, everybody knows about this. And of course, I know you would know this as well. So in other words, even if what kind of interference the Chinese government would make, in any case, the accreditation from worldwide cannot be made to those being selected by the Chinese government. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Professor Ishihama, for the detailed explanation about the reincarnation system. And we know that in China, the current PRC government, they place religious affairs under the control of the CCP. They have a united front department. So everything about religion is controlled by the party. Yeah, and of course they manipulate and they distort it, and so this is the situation faced by Tibet. Yeah. Okay. Right now we still have about 10 minutes, and floor is open. And like to request the audience to address questions or comments. Please, the lady, please. Yes. Yeah, microphone, please. Yeah.
Hello. Tashi Delek and konnichiwa, everyone. I'm Tenzi Chunzi, member of the Tibetan Parliament in exile. I'd like to first of all begin by thanking the panelists, the speakers, for leading this discussion on this very important and critical topic, which is not only timely, but a necessity in the rising phase of authoritarian influence. So my question is for former diplomat, Mr. Dilipji. We've seen how China uses disinformation and propaganda, and one of the most visible examples being the cartographic aggression, like the recent renaming of the 27 places in Arunachal Pradesh. Likewise, Beijing insisting to call East Turkestan as Xinjiang and Xizang for Tibet. So these unilateral sort of assertions begins with Beijing and later on gets adopted or even tolerated by other nations. Sometimes for economic and diplomatic reasons. But my question here is, what practical leverage do we have to persuade other nations to not buy into or echo CCP's narratives in a more informal manner? How can we sort of persuade them to not sway to Beijing's false claims?
Thank you. That is a simple question and yet a very difficult question to answer. We all know that China has become an economic and military superpower. What is more important is the economic power of the country. It is the largest trading partner of nearly 2/3 of the countries in the world. So countries are unwilling to annoy China, and China has very deep pockets. Some time back, some Indian journalists had been taken to China, and they all came back and wrote articles saying, China will decide on the succession of the next Dalai Lama. Then the use of the new Chinese name for Tibet, Xizang, is also become fairly common in the Indian media. People start using Xizang instead of Tibet. What people try and explain to people in India is not only is that the name is Tibet, because it is based upon what the Tibetans call their own country, which is both, and the border that India had in the northern border was never with China, it was always with Tibet. So it is the India-Tibet border, not the Sino-Indian border, but that is what is commonly called in India. So given these deep pockets and the economic power, it is very difficult, but we have to continue to keep alive the historical facts and the fact that the people of Tibet have a right to decide their own future. So it is not easy, but we have to continue this effort, just as the people of Tibet have to continue their struggle.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Tujiche. So my name is Arif Irani. I'm from Canada. A very quick question for Professor Ishihama, which is just this idea about the logical inconsistency of the Chinese position. Everything, for anyone who's studied politics, understands about Communist Party doctrine is that allegiance is to the party, it is not to anything else other than the party. Therefore, religion goes by the wayside. Yet what you actively have, what you've been describing, what we all know is that a completely manufactured method of selecting the next leader of the Tibetan people and of Tibetan Buddhists. That is at tension with Communist Party doctrine. How do the Chinese reconcile that logical inconsistency within their own doctrine in terms of what they're doing with the disappearance of the actual Panchen Lama and the creation of this second manufactured Panchen Lama?
どうもその自分が一貫していないということに関して。
Well, regarding the lack of consistency of themselves, they seem to be not caring at all. Regarding their contradiction, their own contradiction, they seem to be feeling no problem at all. By selecting the successor by lottery, so to speak, it seems that they feel that they can hear the voice of the heavens or the God. So they are not the one making the selection, but they are doing the same as the Chen Emperor. So they are apparently having a traditional behavior in their own way. Well, I don't understand completely because the current people of PRC, ethnically speaking, are different from those of people under Chen Emperor. And the Panchen Lama currently is called fake Panchen Lama internationally as well as internally is not appreciated at all. So learning from that, the Dalai Lama 15th Dalai Lama selected by CCP, I don't think they would do that, but this is just my optimistic guess. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. My name is Tapir Gao, Member of Parliament of India Lok Sabha. Madam has nicely narrated the story of incarnations. I place this, not the question, an idea. We have seen that the CCP has already decided in 1959 that the 15 Dalai Lama will be selected and choice by the Communist Party of China. At this juncture, we are in a crucial stage. On this 9th World Parliamentarians Conventions on Tibet, can we have a resolution that after his 14 Dalai Lama, he will have incarnations. Buddhism has these long histories, and we have seen it till today. On the other hand, the Communist Party of China will have a choice of their Dalai Lama, and there will be a kind of competitions through Chinese propaganda and the truth behind the Buddhist incarnations. So, two choice of Dalai Lama will be the 15 Dalai Lama. So, it is appeal to the House and to the panel that why can't we adopt or place a word that the world should recognize, and we should recognize the truly spirituated, incarnated His Holiness Dalai Lama, the 15th Dalai Lama in Pusa. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. You want to respond very quickly?
No.
Okay. Yeah. We actually have another question. Very briefly, I would like to invite Mr. Singha to briefly respond. Just 1 minute.
Okay. Yeah, I just make one very brief comment on the issue of China using Tibetan Buddhism or trying to interfere. Now, on one side, of course, it is the fact that China would like to control in religion because it has a strong influence in Tibet. But there is also, I think, a cynical use of Tibetan Buddhism because historically, Tibetan Buddhism was used by the Mongols and the Manchus to strengthen their rule in the Chinese Empire. And now with falling popularity of communist ideology, perhaps the Communist Party of China is trying to use Tibetan Buddhism and revive it as a factor of influence within the empire and outside. Thank you.
Yeah, these are actually very, very important issues. And because the time is up, we cannot continue. But I believe we will continue discussing these topics in the afternoon sessions. Okay, so this session is now complete. So thank you very much for, oh, you have, please, sorry, very briefly. Yeah.
내가 배명 아니 진두 건가서도 라고요. 이게 간드셔야 돼. 영원 was the 줄로니 건가 로벤치모. 잠구 시하 마요 미고 라라 간드셔야 이 강게 다다 강드네 말아야 강사장의 전부 마음바 폐위게 건드정아바 디고라야 왠지 제쇼라 하나 감에도 배하고 송송 강사장의 전부 저 꾸준정아마데 마노 만초와 자퇴지 아주라 땡땡가 탈레 타해도 탈람 요레스 연아양 벤치름부치 다다데 마노 만초와 샤 이캬바텔라야 자나 슝키 안에 텔라야 안에 켈레 마제와체 코론족 로스 조바지 주마지 샤여라 다다 카운트나 펜자 몽바탄소 테나우 징케 마옹바 자오름부치 콘트린 쭈앙바데 텐데지 샤용나 텔라야 아란조 자지케 텔라야 니바메와당 텐데 마용와에케 네쇼동 탈람 안에 간리요나 요나메나스 간리요나 데지 수노 니 간리쇼데
We don't have.
We don't have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
So I think that we have to finish here, and later I will ask the host to provide a translation to the audience. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. So this is the end of the third session.